Wait, I haven't even said my name. Hi, I'm Lauren Fior. I'm one of our Brink advisors. We have two Brink advisors who really do have deep specialty in science and in SBIR, and in fact have workshops going on around SBIR right now. And so if you're not familiar with that, I wanted to make sure we had them on the call. So if you have questions, they're here both for the duration of the call, and we'll answer questions about how the Brink can really help you with this process. We thought, though, it'd be really helpful for you to get some new perspective and bring in our guest speaker today, Earl Hager, who also has deep knowledge of the grant process, and just to give you an additional perspective and some commentary and resources. So it's great to have Earl Hager here today as our guest. By the way, I should actually call out the names of our two brilliant advisors on the Brink team. So Kurt Becker is one of them, and you'll see him on video, as well as Dr. Martin Kleckner, who are our Brink advisors who really help out a lot of our clients around SBIR, as well as kind of general science knowledge. So without further ado, though, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Earl Hager. Earl Hager is the managing partner of the NEUTRINO Donut, a consultancy focused on the management and commercialization of science. The NEUTRINO Donut is a partner of the Texas Global Health Security Innovation Consortium. Well, that's a mouthful. TexGHS. This is a consortium organized by the University of Texas at Austin between academia, the public sector, and private sector partners that coordinate efforts to support companies working towards pandemic preparedness and response. Earl's worked extensively with corporate R&D groups. He's introduced products to these organizations. His projects also include grant reviews for DOE, DOD, NIH, NSF, and other agencies, as well as US and foreign universities. He has a lot of experiences helping universities, doing SBIR grant development, and running multiple startups. He's also a member of 2 grant panels with NIH and DOD. So certainly a lot of perspective and experience to share, which is why we're very, very glad to have our guest speaker, Earl Hager, with us today. Without further ado, Earl Hager.
Hi. I've also been added to a National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering, NBIB, Rapid Acceleration Initiative. That came in this morning. I'm in Culver City, California. I used to live in Austin for 20 years, and I moved out here about 4 years ago. So I am a local resource in that respect. And that's me wearing the NEUTRINO Donut branded face scarf. My expertise is in global technology commercialization. I've worked with a lot of SBIR and STTR grant processes, helping people mostly in the area of commercialization, which is a touchy point for a lot of people and where a lot of science folks have their challenges. So before we get started, I've worked in a lot of different spaces, whether it's biotech, material science, EPA, all these different things. I've done assessments for different government agencies. So if you have a question, Lauren's going to be monitoring the questions, and she'll stop us depending on what's going on and where it is of interest. So I can help you with a lot of these questions that come up, and this thing can be interactive or not interactive. I can get this thing done in 30 minutes or longer, and then we can take questions on the back end, or we can stop at different spots and have conversations. I would also add that this slideshow is available as a PDF. It has a lot of links in it. And so from that perspective, Lauren can share the PDF file with everyone so you can look at it on your own later on. And apparently, in order to speak here, you have to be wearing a hat. So I'm wearing a hat. So this is why you need to pay attention. Corporate innovation and licensing is not really happening. Companies are cutting back on their R&D budget. They're basically trying to hold on until after the pandemic passes, which might be March, who knows. So the R&D is not happening. Biotechs have been affected by the shutdowns because labs have closed, which means there's going to be a huge gap in the testing that goes on in the processes. And the angels and VCs that weren't already too conservative for our own tastes are even more conservative. So you need to figure out a way to get to the marketplace and access all these different spots. And that's the purpose of this conversation, is to show you how that can be done, and by leveraging the grant process, how you can expand and grow your business. So this is all about planning. The government provides the money, but the validation is really what we're looking for here, is because you're getting a team of people looking over your stuff, and they're going to come back and say, hey, this is interesting, or this is not interesting, but you're going to get that validation, and that's going to help you not only with your non-diluted funding under the SBIR programs, but it's also going to help you with, on the back end, connecting with university, with companies for corporate licensing or with venture capital people, because you will have taken steps and you'll advance to the marketplace without their help. So there's two kinds of grants. The phase 1 grant is where you prove the technical merit of your idea, and that's where you'll basically get reviewed by a lot of heavyweights. You know, you talk about heads of research at different schools. I mean, I've been in the meetings, and I have an MBA, and I was the lowest ranking person in the room with all the doctors and et cetera. The phase 2 grant is really where I have demonstrated my value in the grant review process, because a lot of people did not understand how to create a product, why you need the expertise to come in and create the product, and the steps of entering the marketplace. There's a lot of resources that are available to help companies do this as part of the grant process. And it's really important to leverage this, because when you're looking at a grant, you'll say, who's the commercialization expert? How are you going to create the product? Who's done sales in this space? But if you do all these things, you'll be on the back end, you'll have an opportunity to enter the market. So in the beginning, as part of a grant, you need to identify your partners, your strategies, and getting people to read your stuff and evaluate your business plan. Are we doing okay pacing wise? Any questions from the masses?
Good so far. Yep. And you've got a lot of folks who this is their first time really hearing about the process. So thanks for getting us up to speed.
Okay. I can also help you if there's specific questions related to your tech or to your ideas. I can help you with that. But this whole thing is about executing your plan. You got to move ahead quickly, or you've got to fail quickly. The thing that people don't give themselves credit for is that they are smart. And if it's not this idea, it'll be their next idea. And failing quickly is actually an advantage, because then you can move on, or revamping your idea, moving ahead. I'm working with one company that's got this technology, and they tried one different pathway, and I said, well, how about this? And we've redirected their growth package, their growth plan into a different direction. And that's the kind of thing you need to be able to do. But you know, if this idea fails, then you need to come up with your next idea. And coming up with your next idea is very important, and understanding that as a strategy. And I do hope people still remember Seinfeld to get that reference. So you have to look at the whole picture of how you're going to enter the market. You have to go out and do your long-term planning and say, this is where we are today, and this is where it's going to be when everyone's buying it. Douglas Adams, who did the Restaurant at the End of the Universe series, did a thing on Dick Cheney's Holistic Detective Agency, and he just talked about the interconnectedness of things, and that things are interconnected. You have to reach out to everyone, but you also have to understand the bigger picture of all these different players and where they come in and work with you. So COVID-19 projects are at the front of the line. I've got friends who put in grants, and the grants were very positively received with a request for changes. But now they're being rejected because people don't have time to read the grants. So it's kind of a tough time in some of these grant processes. But if you have something COVID-19 related, you're going to get attention. But well-prepared grant proposals get funded. If you get rejected, they do give you a list of things and say, this is what you need to fix. And in the next review process, they'll go down that list of things that you need to fix. And if you fix them, you'll often result in funding, but they're pretty specific about what needs to be done, and this is an advantage to you because you're going to get feedback. The other part is for you guys, for folks working in startup, is I'm not sure how familiar you are with the patent process, but provisional patent is fairly simple to generate. It's good for a year, but by tying that in with a grant proposal, you can make a decision 8-9 months down the road on whether or not you want to go for the full patent application, which is very expensive, or whether you want to let it go, because based on the fact that you're going to get a grant in your space or not. This is particularly of interest with university technologies when they're going to do the provision to get things out the door, and there's opportunities to license. So the grant process is an aggressive time frame. You need to look at your skill set and then also look at how you're going to outsource. If you've never done design by manufacturing, you identify a design by manufacturing group. If you've never done sales, you want to identify someone who's going to manage the sales process. You need to expand your team, and a lot of these people will take on risk, knowing full well that they will get paid if the project goes forward. If it doesn't go forward, they've put nothing on the table, but a lot of people handle bids like this on a regular basis. So grant sizes are from 300K to 1.5 million. The amounts of your mileage will vary depending on what's going on. So as noted, research and commercialization for the phase 1 and phase 2. If you talk to the program managers at the different agencies and they say, do this as a fast track, then you should go ahead and do it as a fast track. If they don't recommend it, you shouldn't. But by describing your aims and say, if I get these things done under phase 1, I'm ready to go for phase 2. That's how you can enter the market quickly and have a grant that automatically goes to the phase 2. These are things that are going to be ready for commercialization, such as a medical device that's ready to move ahead. So usually when someone says, what are you going to do with the money? It's this joyful thing like congratulations, but this is a budget question. You got to break down the whole process and say, I need this much money for research. I need this much money for product development, and this whole breakdown. And the people looking at the budgets are pretty serious people. And so they're going to know how accurate your numbers are and if they're well planned and if they're serious. If you're going to tie in a university partner, they'll come back and say, here's our costs for doing this particular research project, and they'll have it cleanly budgeted out for you. Universities charge overhead, which I'll be covering more shortly, but for example, the University of California system charges like 56% overhead, which pays for the lab space and other things as part of the process. So at the end of your planning, did you do these things? Did you really break it down? Do you have a full team on this? People who are engineers may not be your commercialization people. You need to bring in people on your team to do these things. Again, you have to have this information and this breakdown of information. So when you break down the market entry process, is it going to involve the research? Do you need to bring in a regulatory consultant? What kind of research needs to be done and what do you need to prove? Do you need to demonstrate that the medical technology does certain things and then you'll know that it's valid for the marketplace? So aims is a very important word in the grant process. Are we familiar with the concept? Lauren, show of hands or something?
If you could raise your hand, either physically we'll watch you on video, or if you want to raise your hand on the as a participant, feel free. We've got some folks saying no, so feel free to explain.
So aims is where you list 3 or 4 things that you need to do to prove that the technology works. These have to be very specific. The assay demonstrates these things. I've got an electronic technology that says we need to prove that we can generate this much voltage. Things like that. They've got to be very specific and they have to have numbers. And if you say, I'm going to be successful if I do these things, that's how you know that the project will succeed and how you can go on to the next stage. The key thing in understanding is that you're getting paid to try and deliver on that. So they're going to look at your aims with the idea of, does this make sense? Is it possible to get there? And do we want to invest the money for you to try? It doesn't mean you've delivered on it, but it means you're going to try. And at the end of it, they'll say at the end of phase 1, it didn't work or it did work. But you have to have numbers. You have to have very specific things. And people are going to look at the aims and say, are these numbers achievable? And if you do achieve them, does it make sense to advance the technology once you achieve those goals? Weak aims is a real killer on different grants. So
Errol, a clarifying question for you. Where are the grants coming from? What are the different organizations that give grants? Dennis was asking, he heard you mention universities, but are universities the ones to give the grants, or is it a mix?
No, I'm coming up on that shortly. I'm going to answer that. There's SBIR programs, which is where we're going to spend our time on when the grants come from government agencies, and that is coming up in a couple of slides. So let me try to answer that there, and if there's more questions, I'll be happy to jump in.
Sure.
Okay. Finally, you got to develop a 1 or 2 page summary of your project and ideas. And if you have technical papers, add them in, especially they have to be public, obviously, and published. But that's how you develop an idea of what you're working on and what you think is important. And these are the steps you do before you consider going out for a grant. You have to have these things developed. You have to have an understanding of what you're trying to do and what you want to try and bring to the marketplace. This is all your pre-grant application homework. And you really have to be thorough about this, and you have to really understand how you're going to get to the marketplace with your idea. So that's the beginning. Now, when you're writing a non-confidential summary, there's 2 kinds of people, the science people and the business people. The key thing that people have trouble with is writing as if there's an expert reading the document. And that's important because you don't want to sit there and say, did you know that diabetes is a really important thing in the marketplace? Because everybody knows this. Or the person you're dealing with either knows this and thinks it's important, because if they don't care about it, you don't need to be talking to them. So your first line is, we're attacking the diabetes market with this solution. Second line is, go technical, go completely technical, and go technical early, so that the second line has someone wanting to find out what you're working on. The less intro space, the better. In fact, if you can throw the words diabetes technology and then dive straight into it, that also works. But again, remember, the person reading it is going to be an expert in that field or have interest in that field, and they don't need to be told why it's important or why it matters or why the market is growing. They already know this. If they don't know it, then you don't really care about them. I always put in a plug here for tech transfer offices, because tech transfer offices always have new technologies and new ideas. And if you can tie in your stuff with what they're doing, that is also a help. Also, tech transfer offices spend a lot of money on their patents, and they have really expensive lawyers who Apple may try to squash you, but Apple will not try to squash the Regents at the University of California. So there's other options that are out there. So when you work with a university, there's an option there to take, you can take an option on the technology, which is about $500 for every 6 months. And you can renew the option and leverage university resources. So now let's get where the grants come from, which is per the last question. And we're going to get into some specifics here, and I hope this is of help. The Small Business Innovation Research Program is 3.2% of the research budget for agencies. 2.2 billion is set aside. This is money that's set aside specifically for small businesses. Small businesses defined as somebody under 500 employees. This includes all the interrelated companies within this. In other words, General Motors can't set up a small business that's owned by General Motors and then act like it's a small business. They don't like that. So you create this business, it can apply for grants. Excuse me. So this is a totally very involved program for evaluation. If you want to look for what grants that are out there, these are 3 links. There's a grants.gov site. That is a list of all the grants that are available. SBIR grants is on SBIR.gov. And again, this is a link. So you can look up all the grants that are out there, and then you can also find out who got awards in different spaces. So there's some easier things. We're going to get to the meat in a second for those of you that are feeling antsy. So the funding is for startup companies. If you need to hire the professor at the university to help with research, you can hire them as part of the grant, but the money goes to the startup. It does not go to the university. The startup gets the money, and then they hire the professor. There are research grants, which are called Rs, like R01s, R20s, et cetera, and they go straight to the university in that respect, and that can be used to push your technology along, but it does not go to the company. SBIR money goes to the company. It's a very important thing. That means you have to have a company. So all these different agencies, NIH, NSF, all across the board, they all have SBIR projects. If you look under each of these government agencies, you'll find topic areas, and you can find a topic area that might be of interest to you. But this is where the money comes from. It's 3.2% of the research budgets from all these agencies, and it's there year after year. They run ongoing cycles, sometimes every quarter, sometimes twice a year. Department of Transportation does it once a year, but they are constantly looking for new technologies and constantly recycling. And again, if you fail in the current quarter, you can resubmit the following quarter, and that's how it'll be evaluated. This is not a one-shot and done thing. So all these agencies have their own SBIR funding. If you look under them, you'll find the opportunities. The military has broad agency announcements, which are used for general descriptions, but a BAA is an important thing because BAAs also fund SBIR. So people often miss out on this. The military takes good care of their people, and they also will do projects related to health, lots of different areas. They run things across the board. I've sat on 2 different review panels, and you're seeing things related to not only military issues with prosthetic devices, but also long-term health, medical treatment, and stuff like that. It's quite a process they have, and this is a really interesting, don't overlook this as an opportunity. The Army Research Lab, for example, and here are the links to them. They continually have BAAs, and they run an open campus where you can visit them. They're up in Aberdeen, but no one's traveling now, so who cares? But Navy has a research lab, Air Force, DARPA, and so forth. But there's a lot of military resources along with the government agency resources. When you're doing a thing, I told you about aims. Aims is one factor on this. The second area of interest is a thing called the pay line. And the pay line determines whether or not you scored enough to be funded. So the pay line runs from 1 to 100. The closer you are to 1, the more likely you are to get paid, to have your project funded. So if you're below the pay line, you get funded. If you're close, if the pay line is 28, they look at 28 through 38 and double check the numbers, and do a second review of you. But the pay line is a word you're going to hear a lot when you're dealing with the funding process. And again, if it's military, if they like your idea, they may go ahead and do something without it. There was a recent thing in the news. The Trump administration is actually helping a trucking company that's been doing a lot of defense logistics, and they're helping them stay open during the pandemic times because they understand the military process. So, I mean, they have a lot more flexibility there. There's online training available, and here's 3 links for learning about what's going on. There's the online tutorials from DoD, as well as the different federal agencies, and then also they do roadshows, or at least they did do roadshows, where they would come out and visit. And they're in San Diego and Los Angeles all the time. So this is there's a thing called an SBIR. There's also STTR. STTRs are the Tech Transfer Office. And if you're with the Tech Transfer Office, you can pay attention to that. If you aren't, don't worry about it. So SBIR, primary employment, must be with a small business. There's outsourcing available. There's a huge budget. That last column there about participating agencies, I believe, is backwards because STTRs are actually greater than 100 million. Oh, I'm sorry. No, actually, it's correct. My apologies. Why would the government make a mistake? So that's how that works. That's where the money is. So here is a topic area for the National Science Foundation. Now, these are all pretty vague. And if you're looking at like the Internet of Things, you know, you can say, I've got a project in this area, but what you really need to find out is your project a priority for the agency at this particular time? This is an important distinction to make because it's not only, you can't say I have a project in the Internet of Things and throw it to them and expect them to jump on the idea, but you actually have to also work with them specifically and say, is this a priority? The question is, how do you find out it's a priority? Well, the answer is you look for the program directors. So if it's an IoT thing, you're looking for Rick, I'm sorry. But if Rick says this is a smart health thing, you should go to Jesus. There's Jesus's contact information. Now the advantage within each of these agencies is all these people know each other, they all talk to each other. So if Rick says, no, it's a problem for Jesus or Ruth, then he'll probably forward the information to them. But they all talk to each other. But I mean, this is the important step. And this is where your odds increase of getting the grant is, did you talk to the program manager? Did you talk about their priorities? And did they come back and say, this is of interest to us? Because if it's not of interest to them, there's no point in putting together a 55-page proposal. But by talking with them up front, getting them to say, I like this, they will give you feedback on what you're doing. They will give you feedback on your planning and ideas. So talking to the program manager is a very important part of this process. They will talk to you. They're required to talk to you, actually. And to the extent that they're not being overwhelmed, they'll give you the feedback on their ideas. And they will tell you that you can share confidential information with them and they do not share it. Lauren, how are we doing?
Good. We've had a couple of comments. Stephen actually asked you a question. He has a product that focuses on bees, and there might be experts in bees, but maybe not in the technology usage of what he's doing. And Steve, feel free to go off mute if you want to clarify anything I just said.
No, I was just curious because mine is more about saving bees from drowning. It's something that goes in the water, like in swimming pools and bird baths, and it lets bees land on it without drowning. But I mean, is there like an expert that would know about that, or that's what
I would go to the EPA. That's probably the first place I would try, and look into the EPA program managers and their SBIRs, because if you're putting a chemical in water, that's going to go through them most likely.
Is that part of this, like the SBIR process?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
The EPA has their own SBIR program.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
And you want to connect with them. Now, the thing is, when you put something on water, or you spray the area, or you put it on the grass and all that, there's a lot of testing that gets involved with the EPA.
Yeah, actually, it's just a piece of foam. But,
okay.
Yeah, I'll still talk to them about it. But, yeah, it's pretty much just a piece of foam that's got some holes in it, and they can land on it, and they don't drown.
There's a thing called GRAS, G-R-A-S. This is another important term. It's on the test and it is required. But it's called generally recognized as safe. GRAS, G-R-A-S. Now, if you're using, if the design and the materials of this thing have been tested before, then it goes on the GRAS list and it's very easy to approve, which I'm going to assume your thing is. But I mean, that's an important term to look for in your description of what you're working with.
Nice. Thank you.
So if it's commonly available, then you want to mention the word GRAS.
Okay. Yep. I just looked it up. I got it.
Okay.
Thank you. All right.
Lauren, anybody else?
Folks are finding this helpful, so thank you. I know we've got a number of folks too who are working on healthcare solutions, particularly around caregivers and also looking at isolation for seniors and hospital patients. So if there's anything you want to kind of call out from a healthcare perspective, go for it. Misty also just shared a reminder too that you've got a bunch of SBIR resources here, including a couple folks who've been monitoring the chat and are happy to help you too. So just please continue to post in the chat. But like I said, Earl, if there's anything kind of healthcare specific you want to call out with regards to the grants, and if there's anything different about working with NIH maybe than working with the other groups on SBIR.
Okay, so if you're in the healthcare market, you want to start with NIH and look at what you're trying to do, whether it's a device or something like that. You also definitely want to go to the military on that piece of it, because the military does a lot of testing and looks for devices as well, anything that helps the soldier. When you go to basic training, you're part of their system for life at that point. I mean, one of the things I learned in one of the panels was that like 20% of the people break their legs or ankles in basic training, and they are medically released from the service because they can't go back in because it's too badly injured. But they're part of the medical system for life at that point. And so that's key to understanding. So if you've got a medical device, you want to check out the broad agency announcements. That's pretty critical. Now, one of the things in medical devices is that you need to break down how it's used on a daily basis. If you're putting it into a doctor's office, who's using the device, who's getting the data, what's the process of using it? One of the problems people run into, and I've seen this before, is they said, well, I've got a tuberculosis test, and they can use it in the doctor's office and get the results immediately. The answer to that is, who cares? Because what they're actually doing is they're taking a blood test from you, they're doing a full panel, they're sending it off to Quest or LabCorp or internally with like UCLA, UC San Diego Health Systems, and they're getting the full panel back in a day or two. There is no urgency in finding a TV solution. And that's one of the things when you're looking at medical devices, who's going to use it, where they're going to use it. Secondly, you also need to understand that it has to interface with current systems. So if you're putting something on that's a lab technology out there, where's it going to go? Is it going to replace something that's already being done? That's part of the challenge there, is that if they already are testing for this, what else are you bringing to the table that would be of interest? If you're dealing with a doctor's office, everybody's billable, and they are designed to see as many people as they reasonably can in a short period of time. Prior to the pandemic, if you're dealing with a pediatrician, the kids are coming in, the doctor says, yeah, you got the flu, like 800 other kids that have just come through here have. And it's either something awful or it's the flu for the most part. So further testing is not necessarily of interest, but they want to get the kids there, get them treated, and move them along. But doing advanced testing in the doctor's office is not of interest. Tying up a nurse or a PA or anyone else to run a test for 15 minutes doesn't really buy them anything. But break down how your stuff is used on a daily basis, who's doing it, what their roles are, is this time billable, who gets the data, where does the data go? And don't forget, you've got to interface with the full medical record system that everyone has. I use 2 different medical systems here, Cedars-Sinai and UCLA, and they both talk to each other, which is really cool. But I mean, that's the kind of thing, if you have a device, it has to feed into that system so that records follow you around. Did that help? Is there other questions relating to that?
Nothing specific, but thanks. That was great.
Okay. Any other questions or?
Not see anything. Does anyone else have a question they'd like to ask at this time? You can feel free to type it or go off mute and ask Earl.
Hey, Earl, I had a question.
Yeah.
Hope you can hear me. I'm in a parking lot. My name is Todd Brinkman. I just so cool. I just completed a book. Ironically, it took 4 years to complete it on virtual reality, where nobody knew what I was talking about in 2016. But I have a series of books that are coming out, and I want to get some grants. And I'm new to the call, so I apologize for anybody else that's new. But I was just wondering what are like good first steps, because I know, you know, like it said, my dad just found out he has COVID this morning. So it's relevant for me. I can't be with him in Phoenix, but we can be together in virtual reality. So it's fun to have written a book about it. So it's all really relevant for me. Now it's kind of personal. So yeah, any places to start? This has all been helpful. So any like new resources to like, where do you go from zero as my company starts?
There's a lot of work going on in virtual reality for training systems. And in the medical space, because there's a lot of, let's start with training. You want to create the situation in which people are going through and help them understand the decisions. I was doing a project with the EPA where they're going into hazardous waste sites, and they wanted to create a virtual reality situation for them. The thing is, the virtual reality there is it difficult to go in with a wrench and unscrew 6 bolts and open up something. That wasn't the hard part. The hard part was doing it in a suit while you're sweating with a limited amount of oxygen, and how fast can you get there and how fast can you get out? And that was the purpose of the training. So the virtual reality piece of it was to duplicate the steps and what you're seeing and getting out there. And so the training was more of how much can you sweat, so to speak. Now, the other pieces in the medical space is there's a lot of repetitive motion that goes on. And there's a great deal of work going on in teaching doctors, nurses, and other medical staff how to handle different situations. The virtual reality is a repetitive process. I work with a technology where they're trying to pull something that was lodged in the person's throat. Well, that's repetitive motion. And if you can practice that in virtual reality a couple of dozen times, suddenly it becomes a smooth gesture. The same thing works across the board with dentists, where how do you get to the back tooth and fix the back tooth without causing the patient pain, and be able to do that in a way that makes your arm not want to fall off at the end of the day. That kind of virtual reality. So there's a ton of stuff going on in that space, mostly to give people practice. So if you're looking for things to do, I would look under the SBIR grant process, which was referenced previously, and find the people that are working in virtual reality and look for opportunities to work with them in developing the products. But VR is a really huge space project in the training space. Many years ago, they were training tank operators. And the thing with the tank operators, they basically took two jacuzzis, put them upside down, put a TV screen in there, and generated smoke, and then they used to smack them with baseball bats. And that's how they duplicated the tank situation. Well, they're more complex now. And in fact, the military games that are played for tanks are often then released as public games. So, I mean, there's a lot going on with this space. Mostly on the military end of things, they're trying to duplicate the effort along with the events. For those of you who play Call of Duty, one is you should read books, but for the people who are playing Call of Duty, I mean, you're going to turn the corner, there's going to be a bad guy there. In real life, you've got to go 2 miles of driving before you find a bad guy, and then you have to suddenly react. And whether you're running, walking, or riding in a Humvee depends, but I mean, there's a duplication of that effort. The VA is doing a ton of work in virtual reality because they're trying to help people deal with PTSD. And believe it or not, they have a plastic gun which has the controller for the video in their hands, but the sounds are a key thing because someone in the service knows an AK-47 or an AR-15 or whatever it is. They know that specific sound. You can't say gunfire, you have to say these specific guns and make that sound. And the less visual information is actually better because they'll say it was 5 blocks away, so they'll generally have 5 blocks marked off in a general sense, but they won't have detailed street views of the event. But that's a key piece of it. So there's a ton of stuff going on in virtual reality. I would hit the SBIR websites. I would look for companies in this space and see where you can help them.
Thank you. Perfect.
I have a question.
Go
Can you
ahead.
hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I have this, I've gotten a patent on this technology that I've developed, and there are people that I could potentially, license it to use this technology, but I'm a little wary of licensing to these people who could try to rip me, basically. And I'm wondering if I could use the grant process to kind of basically use the grant process to do what they're doing, so that I'd have the whole package. Use my the patent that I have on this one piece of the technology, and then basically eat their lunch. I'm wondering if that grant process would be useful for that.
Can you vaguely describe it so I can give you some?
Yeah,
specific...
so I have a software. It was made with attorneys in mind, but it's really applicable to any industry, whether like a citation. What my software does is it turns all of the citations that are in a written document into hyperlinks to the source documents. And so, and I'm trying, the people that I want to take to compete with, I think now would be these companies that there's about 5 of them that provide the filing and case management software for all the court systems in the United States. And I have the patent on the linking part, and I'm like, hey, why don't I just do what they're doing and offer the linking with it?
I'd find a lawyer. I am
a lawyer.
Okay, but I mean, I'm just saying from someone who's experienced in licensing this space, because you're dealing with a legal profession, and my question on the IP, and I don't know the answer to this, is your IP blocking people, or is it something people can get around?
Well, I mean, that's the patent attorney's job.
Right, and that's why getting a patent attorney involved might be the option. I'm not sure if this is a government grant space as much as it is creating a company and a service around it and letting them buy you out, which might be your longer term goal. But there's a guideline on licensing that you might want to consider checking out. It's basically, they call it the 25% rule. And I'm just making up numbers here, but if you, and I'm trying to make sure my numbers work out. If you say something sells for 100, your piece of the technology sells for $100, and 60 of it is cost, and 20% is sales and marketing of the technology. That means $80 is a cost of what you're doing, leaving 20% as the margin. Now you take 1/4 of that, which is 5%, which is $5, which is 5% of 100. And 5% would be the royalty rate, which you would begin negotiating against. Okay, so it's the direct cost plus the sales and marketing for the technology itself. And then you take 25% of what's left over, and that's the rate.
Okay.
$60 plus 20 is 80. That means you've got $20 left over. Take 25% of that, which is $5. And $5 goes against 100 at 5% rate.
Okay.
And 5% is the royalty rate in which you would negotiate against.
Why do you think this wouldn't be a good idea for the grant process, for a grant type situation?
I'm not sure if that's going to necessarily turn things on for people. I think if you're looking maybe less with legal documents and you're looking in other areas for publishing or searching, there's a great deal
to all these things, yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking of seeing technologies where they're basically trying to help people with their searches, so that you'll have a group within Pfizer that's looking for updates in diabetes, and being able to turn those, grab those files, grab those updates, and turn things into links. That might be of interest to them. So there's tons of searching technologies that are out there that are being funded on an SBIR basis. So I would look under searching technologies and see if that's an area of interest on your end. That might be a good starting point. But that is a hot button there, because people are trying to, basically there's tons of stuff that's being released on an ongoing basis. And people are trying to cull the information quickly and easily and send it up to the VP. Okay.
Well, we have a, sorry to interrupt there. Earl, we do have a question on chat from Janice Stevens. Janice is asking if this really must be an idea, or can it be a product that's already developed? And it sounds like she has a product that's on Amazon and she wants to take it into stores, and can grants help with something like that? And Janice, feel free to clarify if you want to come off mute.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a non-slip product for bathtubs that's sold on Amazon. Been trying, it started in 2018, been trying to get into retail stores, have not been able to do so. Would love to get grants to be able to buy the packaging materials in bulk, saving money so that I can ramp up to sell more. And I'm just wondering if it's too late for me with this product because it's only for startups.
I've been trying to think. I think I'm struggling with this, trying to find out how this would be an advancement of any sort on new ideas. I'm not sure if it is. If you're trying to break into the retail space, that you can't. Walmart's holding an open innovation thing as a side note, but they're really brutal to deal with. I would try to find some local chains and try to get on their shelf, as well as a couple of smaller companies, and use that as a starting point. Generate some action. Did that help? I mean, did it work when you tried that, or what happened?
No, you know, places like Ace Hardware would say things like, it's not an it's not an A-list product. You know, it's not something that's going to be in high demand. I'm on an application called rangeme.com. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's a buying platform where buyers look at your products. And I haven't had any activity on that. Just knocking on doors, bringing my product into stores. It's a safety innovation. It's instead of a rubber mat, you know, you use this non-slip coating to paint onto the bottom of your tub. It's cleaner and it's environmentally friendly. So I consider it an innovation because there's not a whole lot of products in the store like that.
ACE is a big chain. Try something smaller, something regional. You're in San Diego?
I am.
Somebody who's selling in the San Diego area or somebody in California, that might be of interest. The other thing is maybe in a children's market that might be of interest. Because kids slipping is a big deal.
So just to go back to my original question, does it have to be an idea in order, an innovative idea? That's what we're talking about on this phone call,
there's
right?
no, I may be incorrect, but I mean, I don't see an idea here, and I don't see technology as being advanced. I see somebody that you're trying to do some commercial product development on. And that's not going to be of interest on the SBIR programs.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, I would start hitting on some of the smaller stores and just develop some traction, because the more stores as you build up and spend a year trying to break into these places, that would be of interest. Any of the plumbing supply places. I mean, sometimes if you market these for different things, if you make it for children, label it for children, if you label it for the elderly, you know, having something that might get some attention from different people. But I mean, years ago, I saw the WD-40 guy speak. He founded the company, and he says the genius move that he made was that he said there's WD-40 for plumbing, there's WD-40 for engines, for electricians, for everything you want, and these little cans are all over the store. And so if you market this thing from a perspective of different applications rather than a general application, that might help. And that's just a labeling function.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Lauren, any others or?
Not in the chat. Anyone else have a question they'd like to ask at this time?
Yeah, I'll ask a quick question.
Go ahead, Kyle.
Hi, Lauren. I'm Kyle. I'm the CEO of a new startup, Scale Solutions Technologies. We're working on laboratory technology that allows for real-time monitoring of reagent stock levels. And we actually recently submitted an SBIR phase 1 grant with me. So I was just wondering, that was in late May. So I was just wondering what the feedback and review process from the program director looks like.
I would think 2 months. Did they let you know what they were doing?
I haven't heard anything since.
Okay. Yeah, they have committed dates on when they're giving feedback, but I think it's about 2 months for them to give you an answer, and then like a month later is when they give you the detailed reasoning behind their answer. So you could be rejected, and then you find out a month later why. Now the thing is, because everything is focused on COVID, you may get rejected only because they were overwhelmed, and they have to respond to you. So I mean, if it comes back and says rejected because it wasn't read, then you know to reapply. If they say it was rejected and here's the problems, then you know you have things to fix. So I would suspect you're about 3 months out from seeing what your next step is.
Okay.
Anyone else? Okay. So that's the program directors, and these program directors are going to give you a lot of information on what's needed. Like I said, you can share confidential information with them. So you will get pre-submission feedback, which is what I just referenced. And they will tell you things you need to work on. And it's very important to do this because this is what's going to elevate you from the lower odds to the higher odds. And having been on a few grant review panels, when you're looking at the team, you say there's 3 scientists, but no one's ever taken a product to the marketplace. It's going to get shot down. But if you bring in the manufacturing consultant, the regulatory consultant, the commercialization consultant, and say they'll work with you on the project, that's a pretty big deal, and that's going to help your process along. So when you're applying for the grant, you've got to expand beyond there and recognize that you've got to throw the money around to get paid. So they do a thing called a quick pitch, and you will see this term come up, and this is on the test as well. But you basically have to put together 750 words on what you're working on. It allows the SBIR folks to decide whether or not you're worth it or not. It allows them to get rid of the flux capacitors. Is that too obscure? Sorry, but I mean, it allows them to eliminate the things that are not going to be of interest, but I mean, you can get feedback from them. And you'll be able to do that by putting together 750 words rather than 55 pages. There's a new process called DRIVE, which is being run by NIH, and I'm sorry, the Health and Human Services. And you should really check that program out because they're running accelerators and they're looking outside parties to get involved in this as well. So that's another funding opportunity that's out there. So after the program managers is screened it and they say these are worthwhile, you get submitted to a team of reviewers. There's like 28 people in the room, and I've been that person a bunch of times. And they have various levels of expertise. And so there'll be the scientific reviewers, there'll be a bioethicist, there are IRB folks who talk about animals, consumers. On a DoD project I was in, they had, a medic. So when someone says, what happens to this first aid cream when you're up in the mountains of Afghanistan? The guy was out there from the mountains of Afghanistan who said, this is going to be fine. Working with prosthetic devices, you had people with prosthetic devices saying, this is what I think will work about this, and this is what I don't. So I mean, there's a lot of different people that are involved in this, and a lot of people with specific expertise, but that's really part of the process, and you're getting a lot of really heavy feedback. And when I talked about in the very beginning about the feedback to advance your ideas into the future, this is where it happens. And this is where you get a lot of free heavyweight consulting on what you're trying to do. And there is a conflict of interest process. So if you work with a company or as part of the school, you're supposed to leave the room. One person can't kill a project because there's, if everyone votes that it's a 3 to 5 in a scoring and you're rating it as an 8, they're going to want to know why. So, I mean, there's a lot of coverage on that piece of it. It's difficult for one person to make a decision that's going to hurt a project. So the thing where people fail is mostly in the commercialization process because people don't understand what it takes to enter the market. And this is a key point, and this is where the SBDC will get involved in the brink in understanding the commercialization process, and you really need to have a lot of detailed information on the spot to be successful. So you want to identify who you're going to work with. That means not just saying, I'm going to work with Pfizer. You're going to want to say, I'm working with this person at Pfizer. Here's their name, their phone number, and their email address. You want to identify your competitors by saying these specific companies, and this is the advantage these companies have, and this is why we're better than these companies. If you have a funding source, you identify specifically who the funding source is, whether it's another grant or where the opportunities are. And for some reason, I'm considered a genius because I use LinkedIn, but I'm just using LinkedIn. And this is where it comes from, is being able to go out there and look for the people who are looking for new technologies. Now, the key thing in this process, and also why I'm considered a genius, is because I don't look for department managers. I look for the people looking for new innovation. And the people looking for new innovation will be the ones who will take your emails and give you feedback on your project. That's the key thing, is find the people looking for new innovation. If you contact, for example, a program manager at Disney, you get this really cool email from the Disney legal people saying, don't ever do that again, which I've gotten. So, I mean, that's how you manage these processes. You look for the people in charge of bringing things in, and they will always take new ideas. They will always take new calls.
Any tips, Earl, for finding them?
Yeah, just search for Pfizer and innovation. And you'll find, and you will, believe it or not, that is the way you will find people who are dealing with new product ideas at Pfizer. I'm working with that Texas GHS thing, and we're trying to identify COVID resources. So I go into Pfizer, I see the fact that, I mean, I've got like 15,000 names on LinkedIn, many of whom I don't know, obviously. But I mean, if I do Pfizer and COVID, I'll suddenly find the program manager for the COVID project. So, I mean, that's how you go in and get these things. But the people who are in charge of innovation are responsible for receiving input from external folks. And they're the best people to deal with. If you're dealing with a program manager, I'm sorry, if you're dealing with a department manager, the department manager is going to be busy doing their own stuff and they don't really want to take on your project. But the new innovation people will. So part of the discussion on this is, what is the format of your product? And you also need to understand what is the sales process. How is the company buying this? Are they going to have a buying process? For example, if you're selling IT products to a large corporation, they're going to be making strategic decisions in the spring, summer, and fall. And by the fall rolls around, they're going to be done so that January 1st, they're ready to move ahead on everything they want to do. If you're selling something in the retail space, Janice, in your example, if you're trying to get on someone's product catalog, well, as of Labor Day, they are locked in on their Christmas sale processes and their Christmas catalogs, and they're not even want to talk to you till the spring. So, I mean, you got to understand the customer's processes and when they buy and how they buy. So when you talk about the market size, you never want to say, I've got a $15 million market. You have to go in and say, I'm dealing with these specific people. And in this case, if you're dealing with a medical device technology like was referenced, you want to say, here are 15 organizations in the San Diego or Southern California area who I'm going to connect with. Out of these 15 people, I expect to sell 3, connect with 3 of them. And that's how I'm going to start the project. You include your assumptions. And if you can demonstrate profitability on $5 million in revenue 4 years out, then you then know that if you go bigger, you'll be making even more money. But the last thing you want to do is say, hey, look, by year 4, I'm going to be making $75 million, because it doesn't work. You would rather have the people reviewing your grant say, you know what, they can be making a lot more than $5 million, rather than arguing that you need to make $75 million in order to be profitable. You're profitable at 5. That's all you need to do. Does this make sense? Are we good?
We are, and we're unfortunately about out of time, which is crazy. It flew by today, and I think a lot of folks had some great questions, and the dialogue was really appreciated. Earl, is there anything else? I know you have additional slides, and folks are going to get a copy of this presentation, but anything else you want to call out in terms of some of the remaining concepts that you have to share before we go?
I'm going to run through and get to the one last slide. And these are all in there. These are books that you should consider looking at, especially up front if you're dealing with military technologies. And they said, now what tells you what your next steps are. And so my daughter sent me this picture of a chessboard once, and she said, is this about a chessboard? And she said, yes, it is, because what happened was that the White Knight advanced and then retreated. And the important thing is when you're looking at being a startup, is don't lose your nerve. And that's the mistake that people make, is they'll give up too soon. But this is a risk business, and you got to move ahead really aggressively and not be afraid to try.
Great advice. Any final questions for Earl? Any other comments or questions for him? All right. Well, again, Earl, we want to thank you for your generosity and your time today in sharing, so much knowledge about this. I think for a lot of folks who are just starting to explore, this was a really informative session. And just to remind folks, if you do have questions about the grant process and need some help, the Brink has 2 SBIR advisors and folks who can help you, and Kurt Becker, who's been here today, as well as Dr. Martin Klunker, who's happy to help you out too. And certainly we'll reach out to Earl additionally if there's an area where we can get his help in too. But thank you so much again, and have a great day. Take care, everybody. Thank you.